Thank you for joining me for another episode of Hobby Time in the Murder Basement, where today I talk with the one and only Vince Venturella from his hobby cheating videos. Such a cool dude. Stick around. We have an awesome conversation. Vince, thank you so much for joining me today. If you have somehow missed Vince's hobby cheating videos and you are an aspiring miniature painter, you have done the internet wrong. I don't know how you've done it, but you've done it wrong. The same thing when it came to Uncle Adam's videos. If you missed Tabletop Minions, you've done it wrong. Vince is one of the most prolific hobby video makers on YouTube to date, and somehow manages to be completely all-encompassing of the hobby, from gaming aspect to the painting. It blows me away. Vince Venturella, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, absolutely, man. I'm happy to do so. That was very nice of an introduction. Too nice, frankly, but I am thrilled to be here, buddy.
I am so I am humbled by the fact that everybody in this hobby seems to be really humble, and because we're in this kind of amazing gaming renaissance right now.
Yep.
And it's something that I have felt ever since I got into this hobby, that I got into it at the right time. I'm actually only a couple years into my hobby journey when it comes to painting miniatures and playing war games. And I've realized in this last couple years, the accessibility of everybody is just blown wide open, especially with things like Twitch, where you can just sit down and get deep into watching people work through their models. It has been really a special time to be in the hobby, and you are easily one of there's 3 tent poles. You're one of them.
Well, thank you very much. And no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is truly a time where I think about when I came up. I began playing in the late 90s, began getting into the hobby, and there was nothing. There was just nothing. You knew what you knew from you and your friend group, and if you weren't tournament gamers, which then were even less of a representative population than now, they've always been an extreme minority. You probably never played outside of the 4 or 5 people who you either played closely with or at your store. And that was your group to know how to hobby. Maybe you got a White Dwarf magazine that told you how to paint, shade, and then complete. Complete was a step, as I've joked many times for years. Complete was one of their steps. That's not how you paint anything. And so, we were all fumbling around in the dark. And now we live in an age where, major miniature games are going on Kickstarter every 5 minutes, and there's all these board game options. There's great gateway games and skirmish games, and there's 1,000 inroads into this now, and it's just the most exciting time to be in the miniature hobby.
Yeah, I feel that excitement, and I've done the classic mistake that anybody with a little bit of expendable income who gets into the hobby does, where I get totally pulled by the new hotness, the new shiny. And so I'm sitting on 5 Warhammer armies that are all in some sort of completion.
Sure.
And I'm 40k and Age of Sigmar. Plus I'm super deep into Conquest: The Last Argument of Kings. I really love that game system. I think it's done by the guy who did Fantasy Battle 6th edition, which seems to be the one that everybody really likes a lot. So it's got a lot of similarities to that old rank and flank style, and I'm just and I've got 2 armies in that. I'm what am I doing? Why do I do this to myself?
Because we can't help it, because we see cool stuff and want to get in on it. But yes, over time, I think you'll find that level out, probably. That would be 22 years into the hobby, as I am. I'll tell you that I think eventually it does come under control. That's not to say I don't buy new stuff that I think is cool, because I certainly do. Sure. I've just managed to sort of balance it to some point, at some stage at this point.
I seem to remember your unboxing videos of all of your new Slanesh stuff when they like brought out the new codex and all that. And I remember like watching the chat, and everybody's like, "Good Lord, when is that pile ever gonna end?" Because it was like 3 keepers of secrets and like all these, and I'm like, this guy knows how to party. This is what it's about. And because I had literally just started a Slanesh army as well, and so when I started watching you work on it, I was like, oh my god, this is the best motivation right now.
Yeah, I mean, that was an army I had waited on for years. Slanesh has always, so there are really 2 armies that are absolutely close to my heart, closer than anything else. The first of which is Skaven, which was my first sort of real army that I got into. Like, I had inherited some old, let's call them secondhand figs that were Empire figs as my initial army. We call those Battlemaster figs that somebody had found and given to me. And I bought a few things for that, but it was just like a war wagon or something like that, right?
Right.
And then the first time I actually said, okay, I want to get an army for me, not something that just a buddy gave to me and said, hey, let's play this game, right? Was Skaven, and that's been an army that's been with me the whole time. I've always played it somewhat regularly. I love it. Those little rats are truly right in the center of my heart. But the second army that really grabbed me was Slanesh. I love everything about Slanesh. I love the hedonism. I love the excess. It is very much what you just described. Very much part of the miniature journey is giving way to excess, to this quest after perfection. So Slanesh is the god of all of us miniature hobbyists.
Yeah, oh, I totally feel you. I entered into my first like painting competition back in November, and literally every model was like a keeper of secrets or the like ecstasy line from Creature Caster, and they just kind of looked at me, and I was just like, it's another Slaneshi thing. I was like, I've got a little bit of an obsession, and the guy behind the counter was like, I think that's par for the course. Like right. If you're into Slanesh, like you are a little bit obsessed.
Yep, absolutely.
Besides the sculpts on the Slanesh stuff, like I always have really appreciated like the lore, like the Fulgrim book. I don't think enough people go back to that Horus Heresy book, because it was kind of like the first real outside the like initial Horus Heresy things, and they're kind of like going through the Primarchs, and that was like the first time I actually really felt anything about the 30K world, just because you're like this like in-depth sort of like hedonism and excess, it was so much more than what I had ever envisioned, and it was really cool to be able to like listen to an audiobook of that and just be like, this book was written for me. Like they understand, like I've had problems with alcohol and drugs in my past, and like those are things that like ring true in that, and I just was like, this book is making me a tad bit uncomfortable, and yet it just made me want to play the army more and get more into
right. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about sort of like, haha, jokey joke aside about Slanesh, it's sex stuff and whatever. Like, yeah, sure, that's a part of it. But by the way, also that is a universally regarded part. Yeah. And by that, what I mean is, in our actual lives, like our real lives we lead, none of us are hoping, but most of us, let me put it this way, are hoping that we don't have to kill anybody, right? And right. wouldn't want to be seeking blood for the blood god. Most of us are not, are especially in times like these, are hoping not to be given any of their grandfather's blessings, right? Nothing has made that more evident than our current situation in the world.
Yeah, Nurgle makes me a little more uncomfortable now than it ever has.
Sure. And, Tzeentch, whatever the heck he's all about, like, look, I'm just trying to get through my day, man. I'm not playing fifth dimensional chess with my life. But it's just the stupidest thing. I don't even know. So, but all of us, every one of us, every day, can empathize with like the Slaneshi experience. I just mean like the if all of them are representative of some kind of sins or downfalls of the human race, it's the one that actually does ring true in the world we live in. Because when's the last time you ate a whole pint of ice cream when you didn't mean to eat the whole pint of ice cream? When's the last time you had just one more drink or two more drinks than you thought you should have? When's the last time you stayed up just 2 hours later to keep playing a video game or work on something that you keep painting a model when you knew you should have been sleeping, right? And on and on and on and on. And by the way, I think most of us are seeking to probably have sex at some point in our lives, whether for just reproduction or otherwise. We probably want to have kids or have a partner or something like that. The point is that everything Slaanesh is about is in fact everything we experience in our daily life. And it's all that the pitfalls and things that we go through. That's what makes it so interesting to me. What's cool about it from a narrative perspective is that it is actually insidious. Like the other gods, the way that they get at you is through either machinations you're not even aware of, or a disease you had no choice in, or by you just being a lunatic in the case of Khorne. Whereas with Slaanesh, it's just doing what humans do. Our oldest stories, our oldest shared cultural stories, if you like, when you go and look at something like the Tower of Babel, Babel, that's a Slaanesh story.
Yeah, Dionysus is a Slaanesh story. From the get-go, it is the most human of them, and that I remember by the end of that book being kind of haunted by it. I just, and especially with the way it went down for Fulgrim, he got the raw deal on the end of that, and and I was just like, man, this is some good writing. And it's one of those weird things that all my friends tried to get me into Warhammer. I've got a buddy here who his first thing was Clan Rats as well, and it's just he was for years wanted me to play Warhammer with him. I was like, I'm just not gonna do it. I've done the Magic the Gathering bug. I'm not gonna do this. And it wasn't until I saw Kingdom Death models where you're like, oh, these are way different than those little rats, because those old school rats, I was like, I can't do that with my eyes, but a big monster I could do, sure, a big monster, but I always kind of joked about the idea of what the story behind Warhammer to get it in, because it just seemed just so oppressive, and there's nothing really fun, there's no good moral there, it's just shoot, kill, conquer, and I was pleasantly surprised. Once I gave it the chance, there's a lot of heart built into that story, and I feel bad for people who don't get that chance to experience that, because I think outside of miniatures, the Warhammer world actually probably has a good chance of being a great IP for storytelling, especially in a day and age where we love our ultraviolence, we like our flashy spaceships. I think you could add a lot of heart to that, and have a pretty good show. I think
it's certainly no less stupid than anything going on in the Fast and Furious.
Right.
So that's fine.
Yeah. So you started playing in the early or in the late 90s. What was the thing that got you into it? How did you find yourself getting totally wrapped up into these little models?
Well, I mean, I had already been, it wasn't some new thing. By that, I mean, I had already been a nerd for a long time. I had already been at that point playing D&D for almost 10 years. And I had played Battletech and 100 other role-playing games. So, I mean, Battletech has a miniatures component to it. Sure. So I had already played Battletech a whole bunch. Although, it's a much different scale. That is to say, Battletech, you might have a couple mechs. You have a couple of things. It's a very, very, very different scale, both in the size of the miniatures and in their 1 to X ratio of the miniature and the number you have to collect. But it basically came about when a friend of mine came over and said, hey, I want to show you this game Warhammer. I mean, it was literally this simple. Came over and said, I want to show you this game Warhammer. Here's some Empire figures. I'll play Chaos. And I'll show you how the game works. And he, we kind of set up our nights and stuff a little distance apart, and he explained the basic rules. And then I proceeded to fail a charge, and then he proceeded to charge me. And then I died, as his Chaos Knights were 1,000 times better than my Knights. This would have been 4th or 5th edition Chaos Knights, right around that time period. And, that Chaos was just outrageously powerful. And so despite getting my teeth kicked in, I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And so we all just kind of started playing, and that's just it. I find that, like most of this stuff, if your group of friends, like I lived in a house with 5 other guys that time, it was in college, and then there was, 3 other friends who would be there, and we had enough room in one of our basements in one of the college house's basements to set up a full 6x4 gaming table. So, we would do these big games.
Sure.
Right? And pretty simple. It just stuck. I think what probably even sealed it in more was not too long after that. Maybe a year or 2 into it, Mordheim came out. And when Mordheim came out, that was a game changer right there. That was obviously skirmish level Warhammer, and it was, you could make very characterful war bands and stuff. It was just a totally different experience. And once that came out, that really hooked me in, because I made a bunch of different little war bands and things like that, and we played that for many years, and that kind of solidified it. From there, I also ended up collecting a 40k army, which I don't have anymore. I eventually sold that off. I only played 40k for 3rd edition or whatever, but fantasy always stuck around.
Yeah,
always stuck around.
And you didn't run away the second Age of Sigmar came around, because that seems to be like the all my friends are still bitter about that. Wow. And I'm like, I don't think you understand, like, Warhammer Fantasy was doing very poorly for the company. Like the financials of it are pitiful when you hear, like, it was like 4% of their sales is like, they needed Age of Sigmar, because otherwise, like, fantasy was done for good. Like,
right.
It lives again as a different form, but like it needed this. It was very stagnant at that point.
No, I most definitely did not. I liked AOS right away. Now, were there things I wish they would have done right away? Sure, probably.
Oh, absolutely, sure, yeah.
I mean, the launch of it was not great by any way you would define such a thing.
Yeah.
But that being said, okay, I didn't see any. I saw only potential when I looked at it. So I also am a game designer and a consultant for game design, and I did that for many years before. Okay. So I've always kept a pulse on sort of I have very strong opinions, I'll say, on what good design looks like, and what the trend in design is, and sort of what's being popular and what's not, what's actually successful and what's not. I also have an RPG podcast where I talk about actual design. So it's called Undesign. You can get it on iTunes and anything like that. I don't hype it a lot, but you can go look that up. It's just like UN design. And my friend and I go through, and we 20-30 minute bite-sized topics about design in RPGs.
Nice.
And so when it came out and I saw that they had gone for this sort of like very simple foundation that you can build on top of, I was immediately like, yes, this is the right way to go. Because as what that would allow them to do then is expand and hide the rules that people didn't need to know. The question is, where do you set your barrier of entry, right?
Sure.
And if you have to learn a 300-page rulebook before you can play a game, your game is going to fail.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And by fail, I mean, like, if your goal is broad-scale commercial success. You can have a niche game with a 300-page rulebook that will have diehard people who love it. And that will be a niche game. And you could probably have some tournaments here or there that'll be attended by people who get together and come from all over to do it. That's perfectly fine. Those games are out there. They do just fine for for the companies that make them and what their goals are, right? But if you're trying to launch a Warhammer brand, your goal isn't a niche game. That your goal is to be the market leader, right?
Yeah.
And when you're trying to be the market leader, there's a certain alchemy of things that you have to have in play there. And those things include like good art that tends to draw especially new people in, good lore. If people are sharing the stories and actively getting invested in it, they'll tend to talk about it more. This is one of the places where AOS was weak at the beginning, but they have built on in a great way since then.
Yeah.
And you've got to have simple rules that people can pick up and start playing fast. That's how you get a broad-based sort of simplistic game successful game, by keeping it simple. That doesn't mean bad. That doesn't mean you can't have whole layers of complexity. Othello is a simple game. It takes a few minutes to learn. It takes years to master that game, right? To be somebody who really understands the nuance of it. Same with a lot of other games like that, right? So there's the strategy. What I saw originally when I looked at it was the core that they've seized onto here is exactly where it should be. They've built a good foundation. Were there a bunch of things wrong with the launch? Yes. Yeah. So many. So very many. And they've openly admitted that. Yeah. But like, I don't know what you would still be angry about at this point. The game is amazing. It's the best Warhammer's ever been. I've never had more fun playing Warhammer.
I'm really surprised at the way that they have, given each unit like their own codex that has like the battle tomes. Like they have their own game. Like each faction is like learning a whole new game, and that is really exciting and also like totally terrifying for my pocketbook, because every time I get a chance to kind of look at it, I'm like, but that sounds kind of fun. I kind of dig on that.
Sure.
And I don't know many games that are brave enough to do that, because it almost feels like, they've kept the bloat localized and instead of like putting it on everybody. And even though like by the end of it, everybody will have bloated rules, and we'll all feel it eventually again, and then they'll need to rein it back in. But right now I just kind of like how like it's there, and they don't tell you, like the Slaanesh book doesn't tell you that you have to use like the depravity points. But if you are not actually thinking about the depravity points and how to like min-max that sort of feature of that army, like you are missing out on like a huge tactical advantage that they have. And as far as I can tell, like no other army really functions like that. And so it seems like a really cool way to play those games. And while I've never actually played any real Age of Sigmar full games, I've like Warcry is what I can get all my friends to play, and
sure.
Every once in a while, like I convince someone that Underworlds is the game that they should play, because secretly I think that that's probably the best game that GW puts out. Like I find that game to be like infinitely fun. It's very fast, and you lose, so what? You go, you play another round. It's good, and and I love painting those little like war bands. I think that's like, for me, like my perfect hobby, like pace. And the big armies can be a little funky, but like none of my friends like Underworlds the way I do, and I don't understand that.
Sure. I mean, what I'll say is, I think that both of them are different kinds of gateway games, but I think they're both fantastic.
Yeah.
One draws in and is a simpler way for people who might like the more miniatures angle, or might have played some kind of miniatures game in the past, or be familiar with the concept but not want to make a big investment. Underworlds is great for drawing in like Magic players, X-Wing players, that kind of thing. So there's slightly different markets they're trying to tap into, but they're both wonderful. They're both well-designed, wonderful games. So.
Yeah. Well, especially now that like Underworlds has like base decks that you can just use that right out of the box and not have to do any deck building. Like that, to me, I was like, oh, that was really smart of you guys, because that's the part that none of my friends want to do. And like, I am totally down with playing a pre-built deck. It doesn't matter.
Oh, sure.
So when did you look at your gray models or your like kind of painted models and go, I can do better than this? Like, when was that spark hit? Because from your videos, it seems like you've been like the Da Vinci of painting minis. Like you do so much stuff, and it just looks like it comes so easy in the videos, but like we all know that is not the case. Like at one point in time you had to wake up and say, I'm changing this, I'm doing this, and I'm gonna fail a bunch of times till I get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I for many years I hate painted. That's what I call it. I think
Hate
that many of us
painted,
do
yeah.
that,
Yeah, I
where
got
you
that
just
one.
like you painted because you had to, not because you wanted to, right?
Right.
And I don't know, probably around 2013, I got back into it. 2014, somewhere in that range. In let me say this: if I didn't get back into it, I stopped hate painting. That's the right way to say it. I started to enjoy it, probably partially because of like life change and just other things. Like I got old enough that I didn't want to do, other things. I've always been a homebody and never really been the kind of like go out person anyways.
Uh-huh.
But like I had the time. I switched jobs. I was looking for something that was going to be fun and an unwinding, relaxing thing to do, right? So I started painting stuff, and it certainly coincided with finding that there were people on YouTube who would show you things and who would paint and who would talk about Warhammer and stuff like that. So the more I got into that, the more I got into the painting, and the more I got into realizing that there was communities that was out there of people who were sharing what they were doing, from a miniature painting perspective, the more again I got into it. So I think that um, ultimately what drove it was kind of that virtuous circle, right? Like I had more time, I was finding it more centering, I was finding more communities to be a part of, and that's just generally a good place to be, right? That
Right.
when you feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself, it's often inspiring and wants you to keep going. So I painted, I painted, I painted. I was really like most things. I'm just kind of interested in getting better at
Sure.
things. I try to do anything I do to a high level, and I kept pushing myself, and eventually I don't know that there was ever some conscious moment until I realized I wanted to go to sort of a first competition. And there's a wonderful chart of how knowledge works, where like you start learning something and then you think you're really good,
Right.
and then but you're actually not, like your real skill versus your perceived skill, right? And your perceived skill is going to jump way out over, like you think you're so much better. Your actual skill level's here, but you think you're like way up here.
Right,
And then
right.
you learn some more and you crash down below, where your perceived skill eventually, a couple years into it, will go below your actual skill. And then
Right.
hopefully on a long enough timeline they match together. Um so somewhere post that peak, certainly, when I was still crashing back down and it started to come back up, I thought I'll start competing. And that was certainly very informative, because I thought, oh, I'm good, I've got some good stuff. And the first competition I went to, by the way, was Crystal Brush, which was the most, the toughest competition in the entire United States.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, but that being said, the first time I went, I did get one piece out of the four that I entered to make the cut. So I was really
Really?
thrilled about that. Yeah. So that was great. Um, and which was, reassuring. Now I didn't end up winning that first year,
Sure.
which is fine, of course. I was sad. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I was sad because in my head, I was like, oh my God, this would be amazing. I could win something first time, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Did not, but that's okay. That failure was so much more important. Like the way that I made the cut but then failed was great that first year, because it lit a fire under me,
Sure.
right? It said, okay, you're okay at this, maybe good, but you've got a long way to go, right? When I looked at everybody else's pieces who were there, I was like, whoa, okay, now I see what we're doing here. I got some work to do. And
Sure.
that
Sure.
really made me focus up. And I kept going to more competitions. I kept submitting stuff. I kept getting feedback from judges. I learned from anybody who would teach me. I took feedback from anybody who would offer, and always with an open heart and open hand. Like if somebody told me this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong, and here's how you want to do, here's how you should be thinking instead, I would really try to take that into heart and then go home and practice pieces using those lessons immediately.
Yeah.
Right? Deliberate, focused practice. And this is sort of so obvious, by the way, when you take it out of this world. If you're let's say you're trying to be good at golf, okay? Sure, why not? You want to be a
Right.
professional golfer,
Sure.
all right? And you're to get a golf coach, and you get a golf coach, so it's somebody who's not you, will look at what you do and say, okay, here's how you're weak, right? and they tell you that your medium range game is weak, so your chipping game is weak. You suck with wedges. You're never getting the actual work you need to get out of it. That's how you're going to get your hole, and improving. That's how you're going to take a stroke off of your game.
Right.
Okay. You don't ever look at that and go, that coach doesn't know what they're talking about. They're an idiot.
Right.
They're
right.
personally insulting me. No, that's why you brought them there, to tell you where you were weak, right? And then you're going to go out and you're going to sit there and you're going to chip balls for a month.
Right.
You're going to chip 1,000 balls a day or something for a month until you're good at it, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I think about this too. Like, if somebody tells you you're not using enough contrast, if you're not using colors in the right way, if you whatever the 1,000 pieces of potential feedback are.
Yeah.
If you get that, listen. Just listen. It's the best thing you can do.
It's really funny. I used to be a musician. I still tool around with it. The ego of musicians is so much different than the ego of miniature painters, which is not something that I expected, especially since getting into it, there were people like you, like Sam Lenz, and like this real kind of personality things happening in the miniature world. I expected there to be a lot of like, I'm too busy to talk to people. I'm too busy to give help, because I was so used to musicians like kind of just like nagging everybody down. There's this weird like superiority thing that happens there, and and they don't like to admit that they suck at things. They don't like to admit that they need work. The fake it till you make it is very much that vibe. And so I was really surprised coming in, specifically finding like your videos, and I was just like, I don't remember the first one, but I remember I felt like I was sitting down in a college course where like the professor was telling me what to do that's right, and he doesn't give a shit whether or not I actually follow him, because like this is your time, man.
Me.
You do this thing, but like I'm trying to save you some time.
Right.
And there was just something about like how matter of fact you were, and you could tell that the reps had been done, and you had like a real command of the English language along with it too. You didn't sit there and and falter around. And I remember just being like, oh, these are my favorite hobby videos. I'm done. I will watch every single one of these, and I have watched every single of the hobby cheating video now. And again, I'm just like, I'm floored that like you're just a guy who's really good at painting.
I thank you, first of all. That's very nice. And I'm glad to hear that they're useful. I mean, that's my goal. I like teaching. I like sharing. And by the way, I often learn as much from doing those videos as anything else. It will when you have to create those videos, it forces you to regulate your thought processes and really actually understand every step you're doing of what might often be unconscious, right?
Sure.
So it actually helps me also, which is great, but I get to help other people. And then oftentimes people will comment, I'll show something that I do, and they'll say, hey, have you tried this thing or this product or done it in this way? No, I haven't. And I'll go try that, and I'll like that too. So there's definitely a shared learning there, right?
Sure.
You can never know everything in an artistic pursuit like this. It's an endless journey, which is what's wonderful about it.
Yeah. So when did you decide that making videos was going to be part of your hobby routine? Because that is a jump that I tried making earlier this quarantine, and I found myself mad and frustrated, and I was like, the things that I like doing with this hobby are not video editing and trying to come up with a pattern for 10 minutes that is conveying a little bit of information that may be a hair different than someone else did it. Like, when did you decide to take that jump? Were you already making YouTube videos? Because I looked at your stats. You have 40,000 followers and over 1,000 videos up now.
Yeah.
And while hobby cheating isn't that long, like 1,000 videos is a lot of content out there.
Sure. I cannot guess at the amount of hours of my life I've spent on a camera in front of or in front of a camera on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, it happened pretty simply. The very first videos I did were really garbage. They were recorded from just like literally the webcam on my laptop, and they were me ruminating on thoughts. And they were wrong, by the way. I was very wrong, but that's okay. That doesn't matter.
Nice.
Sometimes you're wrong in life. That's what goes on.
Yeah.
And as I got into, as I got more into doing some videos and liking them, I said, well, I like doing this hobby. There are things that I do that I think would be helpful, because I was always very focused on time. The time is the one resource you will never get back. You will make more money in your life. You will get more everything in your life. That is to say, there's always going to be another day, until the last day, I suppose, for you to recover any expendable resource. And that's the whole point. The only thing you'll never get back is time. So for me, it was always about what's the most efficient I can be and still achieve quality. That was what I wanted to teach. That was what I wanted to do. That was what I wanted to communicate. And so that became the focus of the series. It was pretty easy. What inspired me to do it? I don't know. Some part ego, some part enjoyment of sharing knowledge, I suppose. And, you mentioned like editing and things like that. Well, my solution for that was very simple. It's called don't edit barely anything. That was really easy. I still don't edit much. I'll be completely honest. I think about what I'm going to do in advance, and I will one take most videos.
Really?
The number of times I've recorded something twice, I could count on one hand.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
I just I think about it in advance and how I'm going to go about it, and then I do it. And sometimes I'll trim stuff out a little bit here or there, but for the most part, I like to show people the whole process. I don't feel the need to edit down. My goal is to teach more or less the duration of the thing, and to really talk about all the nuance, because I think in the nuance does expertise lie. And it would be easy for me to just make a 5-minute video or a 10-minute video that's like, then I did this, then I did this, then I did this, then I did that. Go ahead, you're done. Go ahead, go have fun. But that's not really going to actually teach you anything, and that's my goal. I love that people have found the channel and like it. That makes it incredibly rewarding.
Sure.
But ultimately, I want to teach how I want to teach, and what I want to teach is a pretty in-depth. And there are people out there who don't like that. Like, I know I've seen people share my videos, and other people be like, "Oh my god, an hour-long video? Are you mad?" And I get it. We're busy. Life's busy. Life is short.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody doesn't want to sit down and listen to an hour-long video. My own favorite hobby content that I take in, by the way, because I still watch everybody's videos. Everybody's.
Sure.
If you're making hobby content on YouTube, I'm probably watching your stuff. And my favorite ones were like when Darren Latham was making videos. He would do much the same thing. He'd be like, "Here's the whole thing. I'm just gonna paint it out for you. We're gonna see it." Like, yes, he would cut some off in the same way I would, where he's like, "Okay, I'm applying this layer. You don't need to see me layer every side of the miniature, right?"
Right.
Great. Or Trent Dennison is another one, Big Deno. He does it where he'll just record the whole painting process and then speed it up to 2 times and narrate over the top. Great, perfect, A+. Love it. I want to see the whole thing. Those are long form videos, and that's what I like.
Well, I find that those are really fun to paint to yourself, and just like kind of keeps you in the zone.
Yes.
And I think with my thing is you had like people like Squidmar and Miniac who are really good at like B-roll, and like the fucking Brian Wilson of it, where you're just like, I'm gonna produce it this much, and so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna produce it this much. And I definitely, my first hobby video I did, while people seem to have liked it, I found myself like killing myself to get it done. And my second one, I did more like straightforward, and like I just was like, thumbs down, not into it. I was like, this one is easily more like actual good information. It's just it's not at that produced level as my last one was. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is the way I want to do it. I don't think that this is my hobby, where I'm finding interviews and stuff to be really cool, because, I was going to go to Adepticon this year. That was going to be...
for so many of us. We are all heartbroken. Yes.
And like, I had that moment when they canceled it where I had this like huge sigh of relief because I didn't want to have to be the guy who canceled going to Adepticon, because
Sure.
everybody talks about it being like, the holy land of wargamers. And I was, I painted up Resin Beast entry specifically knowing that I wasn't going to win, but I wanted to be in the same room with you and Sam and John Ninas and like just be like, thank you guys so much for everything you've done. And like that has actually been really cool that, outside of Adepticon, you guys have actually all been really cool to like, sit down and talk with me. But that seems to be something that is uniquely this hobby too. Like, Comic-Cons exist and stuff happens at them, but I don't know any other like conventions that are like an Adepticon. Like that is like wholly unique to this hobby that I find really fascinating, and I really hope they bring it back next year, because it would be tragic to go 2 years without it.
I agree. I fingers crossed we'll be on the other side of this by next year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts on that. One is that I certainly, I watch all of Squidmar stuff and Miniac stuff, and I love their videos. They are masters of video production. They
Really
are
good.
entertaining. They communicate information. They're fun. Those guys, there's a reason that they're titans like they are within our community of subscribers. Right. It's because no matter your interest, you can get something out of their videos. They're fun, they're fast, they're funny, they're informative, they're entertaining. It's banging on all cylinders. They work really hard to make that happen. Like, anybody who thinks what they do is easy, you're out of your mind. What they're making is so difficult. The hours that they put in to those creations, from scripting to execution to editing to the whole shooting match, right? Yeah. And but nothing of awe of what they do. But I know that's not how I would want to make videos. So my goal was never to be one of them. Like, they are better at making videos, at producing things than I am. Period. I know that. Sure. And I'm accepting of that, because that's not where my passion is. And for them, that is part of their hobby. We all have part of our hobbies, just like in how some people will convert every miniature that they make because that's part of their hobby. Or some people love to sculpt because that's part of their hobby, right? I'm not a sculpt. I tried sculpting once and I was like, nope, this is terrible. I hate this. I never want to do this again, right? Other people in the world who are good at this, go out there and do it. And for the same reason I don't grow my own food, I'm not sculpting my own miniatures. Like, we've got farmers, they've got this situation handled. You don't need me getting in the mix of it.
Right.
So, I love that, and I love the breadth of content that we have. All of that. When you mention Adepticon and just the community and the fact that everybody just hanging out, you can go talk to people and everybody's very friendly. My honest answer is, it reminds me of when I used to go to comic book conventions in the late 90s after the crash. Mm-hmm. So if you remember, in the mid 90s, there was all this, early to mid 90s, there was all this buildup, right, around comics. Comics got huge. And I've been a comic book geek even longer than I was into D&D or anything else. Like, from a very young age, I was buying comic books. And so I was into comics, and so then the big crash happened, right? I mean, the market just fell out of the bottom of comics.
It was the Spawn movie. I am wholly convinced that Spawn built the industry and then destroyed it.
There's a couple really great documentaries you can go out there and watch about Image Comics and sort of what happened there, and there's some really fascinating stories there. Here's a fun side story. I was at a convention once, and I was coming out of a talk, and so I'm here, and somebody's right behind me, and they are just bagging Rob Liefeld. So Rob Liefeld's famously the guy who did a lot of art. He was part of Image, and he created Cable amongst several other well-known characters and things like that. And this guy's just bagging on Liefeld, because obviously Liefeld had all these going jokes about he couldn't draw feet and everything with pouches and bags. Right. There's a bunch of Liefeld jokes going around. And so I'm here, guy behind me is just at the top of his lungs yelling about how Rob Liefeld is an absolute, just horrible, terrible artist and person and everything. 2 people ahead of me is Rob Liefeld, who can most certainly hear this guy.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was like, wow, that has to be horrible. And it's how I always think about it. Like, it left a real impression on me, because I put myself in his shoes, and I was like, look, I might not like his stuff, but that is terrible. Like, to be somebody who's a creator who does work hard at your stuff, and you just hear some nerd who, you know, is not out there making comics, not doing this, just yelling at you, just completely demolishing your stuff and attacking you. So I always try to respect creators, right? Because you're not them, you're not doing it, you don't know what their story is, what they're going through, you don't know their life. So I try to do that. It reminds me though of that time period. When you go to Adepticon, it feels like the comic book conventions at that time, where I would go sit down in the bar, and Mark Waid and Jim Lee and you know, Alex Ross and a bunch of people would just be hanging out down there and would just sit and talk with you. You could just go, you know, just rock up to their table, sit down, have a beer, chit chat about comics. They had no ego. They were just all the nicest guys.
Yeah,
and these are like,
thank you for being here. Yeah, they're huge names.
And, you know, they are people who I, to this day, have an unbelievable amount of respect for, and have created most of the things that have defined my moral compass and life and everything else of value.
Sure.
And yet they were just the most down-to-earth guys, had no ego about the whole thing, right? And so I've always thought that's how it should be. You're just a person. I'll also mention as a shout out that I do have a wife who finds me completely unimpressive and is never going to let me get some kind of ego. Like, that's not ever going to happen. She knew me before and will certainly, you know, she's not impressed. So there you go.
Dude, that's the same with my wife. She's like thrilled that I have something and that I'm making friends with other people who are really cool. But then I'm like, so what do you think? She's like, you know, it's good. I'm like, oh, right. Come on.
Yeah, it's like, keep yourself in check. You're not Chris Hemsworth over here or something, you know, don't get a big head.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, it's a really interesting thing. And you know, I was hearing like Casey from eBay Miniature Rescues talk about like when he went to Nova Open, and because he's, you know, doing content creation on YouTube, he got invited to a room, and it was just like Peachy hanging out painting by himself in a room in this hotel in Vegas, and he like just got to sit down for like 4 hours and hang out with Peachy. And he was just like, it was one of the most surreal things, because like you couldn't tell if he was having a good time before you showed up, but he was like thrilled that people were there.
Sure.
And that's something that like I think is a really cool thing about this hobby, is that like whether or not you're a person or not, you know, like a name or not in it, like you still like the same stuff that we all like. You know, you know, you love, you know, tiny toy soldiers and these little imaginary adventures that they go on, and that is something that I think that the ego not being in this industry is like super refreshing for, because like we are all on that same plane, which
100%. We've all so yes. Let me talk about now a difference between, say, what happens at a comic book convention or anything like that. If you're an actor or a creator of a comic book or something, most of the people you interact with aren't also creators or actors. Now, that's not to say some people you interact with don't have their own webcomics or might not draw or whatever. You know, that certainly happens. Those people are certainly out there. But a lot of the people you interact with, especially if you're like an acting celebrity, they're just fans. They aren't actors. They're just fans. They don't actually do the same thing you do.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if I'm interacting with somebody who's walked up to me at a convention and says they like my stuff or whatever, they're also a painter. They're also playing the games I play, right? We're the same. There's no difference there, okay? We might be at slightly different points on our hobby journey into like how long we've been doing this or the piece we can produce, but that is a very minor difference when it comes to the spectrum of like, oh yeah, we both play these games, we both paint, we both sit down and use a brush and the same paint and the same water and make a thing happen. right?
Yeah.
There's a lot more the same than different. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful, both just reality and difference about this particular hobby.
Yeah. It's it's really cool, and I think it's really special. You did a video a year ago now, maybe, and it was about the flower in the vase with the red background.
Yeah.
That was like very creative and bright and intense and visceral and raw, and it just like hit you. And then you had this like incredibly meticulously painted still life of a very similar flower in a very similar vase, more muted tones. And you talked about this video, and I don't know if that was like, you know, something that a lot of people resonated with, but I'm a professional picture framer, and so I am used to the red flower, the intense impasto, and like the colors aren't even right, like, but it's like this
Right.
raw emotion thing. But that sort of aspect is something that I like every single day see. And when I look at miniature painting right now, well, I think people are just putting out amazing work. It's humbling to see the level of detail that people are putting into it and getting their blends the way that they are. Do you see a place for that raw passion, like I'm slapping paint on it and I'm doing it and I'm moving on because this little sculpture is now a piece of art on its own? Because you give so many good techniques to get it smooth and to blend, and I'm like one of these days Vince is going to do a video where he just like slaps paint and throws it on, and it's just like the raw emotion thing. And I'm waiting for a leader to do this, because like that is a world I want to see.
Sure. So I will say that yes, does this world exist? 100%. There are already people who are very much leading this charge, by the way. So certainly Banshee is one of them, and his entire movement around F smoothness and getting color and impression like that. But you also have somebody like Pirate Monkey Painting, who Anthony has done several pieces in impressionistic styles instead of standard stuff. So if you go back and if you look at Pirate Monkey Painting, who is great, like that's it's Anthony, but if you look at his stuff, it's under Pirate Monkey.
Sure.
Beautiful, fantastic artist. If you look at Craft World Studio, that's another good one. So they're out of Serbia, and there's two of them, and you know they just posted a piece today. So they just literally, I think, joined Twitter as of the day we're recording this. They had been on Instagram and stuff like this for a while, but they're both great artists. They're a couple, and they travel around the world and teach and paint a bunch of stuff. They do beautiful work. But like if you look at the piece they just posted today, as of the day I'm doing this, I think he did a Critical Role fig or something. I don't ironically I don't follow or actually know anything about Critical Role, despite playing D&D for more than 30 years. But the piece is rough. Like there's no, like he's not making any great attempts to blend. It's very rough. Like if you look at it, you can just see lines and stuff like that. But it's beautiful and bright and colorful and emotional. It's everything you were just describing, because he's using light and color in this evocative, inspirational way, right?
Right.
And you know, I mean, I think that people painted. Here's what I would say: people painted with the ultimate goal being "quote unquote" realism,
right,
or something, whatever that means, in canvas art. For if we start at the time of the old masters in the Renaissance, which is obviously, we can talk about whether or not that's real and blah 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 blah. It doesn't matter.
Sure.
If we start this in like the mid 1500s, whether you're talking about the Northern Renaissance or Southern Renaissance, it doesn't matter. Both were sort of aiming at realism and using all sorts of different tricks and tips to get to realism.
Their babies were the best because they were just tiny men.
right.
just short men, and they're the best.
It was like 400-ish years, depending on where you start this clock or end this clock,
Yeah.
before we really started to break out in big ways and get into where other forms of painting became, other than just kind of aiming at this traditional realism, became the sort of the norm, right? And then very quickly things started ramping, right? The fall of impressionism into a lot of other things, into modernist, postmodernist art, and so on. And all of those things were, my point is, that was centuries in the making. And if you take umbrage from the thing and say, well, actually in the early 1800s, there, yeah, I know,
Right.
I'm not, please don't get, I'm trying to make a point that there was a very long period of time where very much like the popular consensus of how to paint was that realism and the kind of perfection of light and studies of color and shadow were the goal, and then it wasn't, right? Then it stopped being the thing.
Right.
And that's not to say, by the way, that those painters eschewed the lessons of light and shadow and things like that. They still used those things.
Of course.
They just weren't beholden to them only, right? And they incorporate a lot of other emotion ideas into their pieces. Miniature painting is still a pretty young hobby. Like, yes, people would kind of paint their little historical toy soldiers going back 100 years with crappy enamel paints. But really, when you think about it, this art that we're engaged in only really came into its fruition, like when acrylic paints became popular on the market in the early 90s. Right? Yes, people painted before then. Yes, I understand for decades and decades people painted, but it sort of came into its own then when it was more than just put paint on miniature. Miniature is now done. Green part becomes green, red part becomes red, done, right?
Right.
And so we're 30-ish years into the expo. Like, we are still on the first generation of people who were really doing this aggressively. And so there's still a lot more to continue to push, to learn, to discover as a community. We've got a long way to go, and I'm excited to see what people push themselves to. Will there always be a strain of realism? Yes, because we're painting little people and they tend to be for games and we want them to look like that. But honestly, already, even things like GW aren't really aiming for realism. They're aiming for look, right? Because the deepest parts are shadows and the outside is always edge highlighted. That's not a realistic take. It's an artistic take.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly valid.
Yeah, it's I find it really interesting, like I often wonder where this hobby would be without the monolith of GW and this idea of heavy metal painting, because they have given so much of like their vibe to us as players and as hobbyists and painters. And even if you don't know that that's something that you like, the heavy metal style is something that you are doing, it's ubiquitous with painting now. It is something that you just do. And because I was instantly started with that, and I didn't even own Warhammer. Like, I was just like, no, I have to do the edge highlights. I have to do these steps, and it was just because I had seen all of the box art and everything looked like this, and it's this like hyper realistic sort of thing where, almost like an 80s, action movie or something like that, but like in tiny form. And it would be interesting to see what would have developed without that, because like the certain things that I really love about like specifically like mid-age GW stuff is like they were unafraid to use like, this is red and it is the reddest red you have ever seen, and this is green and it's the greenest green that you've ever seen. I love that like almost like hyper Disney look, because it's so cartoony, and it goes back to comic books for me as well. But like those are the things that are like still weighing on the industry, and it's interesting to think about that, because I think that there's so many talented artists out there that could be expressing themselves a little bit more. But then again, I don't know if this is the industry that really actually needs to do that. Like they get so much just out of rolling dice, where like artists really love smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey, you know, like like they've got that aspect of their life. So like I don't know if the game aspect, the gamification of our art is something that hurts us or helps us.
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's all fine because I think the watershed moment was when Rackham miniatures came out, because the Rackham paint shop, and this was a part of a larger movement that was happening in largely Spain and France, but we can also certainly credit some Italian painters at the time as well. We're making a lot of different moves. We're moving away from that traditional late 90s GW ultra saturated color style you're talking about, and had introduced a completely new type of painting into the industry. So Rackham Miniatures, what I hold up, because that was the one where you started to see it on box art. Individual painters had been doing it for years, and they kept their secrets very close to the chest. But once it started getting out there in the world on box art, and you were looking at like, here's a GW box, and this thing is just a red thing with bright green leaves on it, and here's a Rackham box, and it's a totally different world of all this contrast and soft glazes and stuff like that. It was like, whoa, what is this thing over here that has completely reinvented my perception of what miniatures can look like? And I think that was a real watershed moment, because that changed a lot of styles overnight. People started trying it, learning it, painting it, sharing it, and then once the genie was out of the bottle, it's out there. And the reality is now, I think it's a good thing, because it gives people the GW style gives people a good on-road. It gives them steps to follow where they can gain early confidence, which is important.
Yeah.
And realistically, there's so many painters sharing 1,000 different techniques and styles all over everything, all over the internet, all over Instagram, all over YouTube, all over everywhere, that like nobody's at a lack of inspiration. If you have a lack of inspiration right now, you're walking around with, blinders on. I don't know how it's possible. I have folders on my computer, on my phone, on everything that's just inspiration folders where I just save things that blow my mind, and pictures get added to that near daily. So,
is that something that you are always kind of trying to keep your finger on the pulse of? Like, what is that new source of inspiration for you?
Yeah, 1,000%. Yes, absolutely. Because I'm constantly in awe of other painters and look at what they do, and I'm blown away by it. That never goes away.
That's awesome. That is like such a good thing to hear, because like when I look at like your stuff specifically, it's your color choices are like pretty spot on, and you like you and Chris Surrey, when you were both talking about like, oh, it's another turquoise model again, and like, and like that which
we're
was
both
like
big fans.
Yeah, well, and like you've got this color palette that you like working on, but it's like for me when I look at your models, it's the like I think it was one of the your first Keeper of Secrets that you did, where you did like all this like spiral work on the dress or the cloak behind her, and I was like, that is something that you didn't need to do, but that extra little bit of time that you put into it took this piece that was already in this like like dream logic sort of color, and like made it feel alive, because it gave this like sense of movement and motion to it. And it was one of the first times where like I had that moment of being like, oh, I should start thinking about like the micro texture and that sort of idea, and bringing more of the freehand things in, because like I do think that I have a tendency to fall into that paint by numbers sort of vibe. And when I saw you do that, it kind of changed things for me, because I started looking at my models and being like, you guys aren't moving. like, you're not doing anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important question to ask yourself of what can I bring to this model that isn't on the model, right?
Yeah.
It's something I always try to ask. What can I add? What can I do to personalize it, to make it my own? Whether it be a little bit of freehand or texture or something. What can I do to punch up the visual interest, to make it rewarding for somebody who's going to take the time to look at it? So I always try to think about that.
Well, it definitely paid off there, and like I tried it on my my resin piece that unfortunately I can't get good photos of it. There's something about filters that when you take a photo of it underneath bright light, the light reflects and you don't actually see like all that cool like under texture that I painted. And it's something that I was hoping that I'd be like, Jason from, Monument, please tell me, like, did I get this or did I not, at Adepticon. And not having that has been like a real a loss, I think, for the community as hobbyists, because like feedback is king. And I think that miniature feedback is, like, it isn't like artist feedback where like sometimes they'll like tear you apart, and it's all with the best intentions. And I have never seen miniature painters being torn apart by the people who are criticizing their pieces. There is this like always this like, you are doing the hard work, you've put yourself out here, and I appreciate your time. And that's something that is, I think, again, uniquely this hobby, which is really amazing.
No, I agree. I think, I think people are often scared of being judged or getting feedback or something like that from a judge, because they're gonna think the judge is gonna look at them and go, "Oh God, you're so terrible." That's not what the world is going to be like at all, ever. Like, judges who are going to give you feedback are trying to help, and they're always going to couch it in what your own personal sort of step on your journey should look like. I've never found a judge to be mean or curt or rude. They've always been helpful and insightful and things like that. That's generally why they're judging in the first place.
Yeah. It's absolutely wonderful, and it's something that I didn't expect. And coming again, music made me really guarded coming into this hobby.
Sure.
And being a part of this has made me like wow, I've like found my people. This is the type of people that I like to hang out with. Vince, we're kind of getting over that hour point here. So I got one last question that I wanted to ask you. Like, what do you think is going to be your next whale in this hobby? Where do you think you're going to take this thing? Because you have made so much good content, and you have done 24-hour challenges that are just like, I sent it to a friend, and the only thing that she texted back is like, "Oh yeah, he's taking the time to paint tattoos on them." It's just like stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah. This guy's crazy. What do you think your next whale is?
I don't have a good answer for you. I wish I did. I have a lot of pieces that didn't go to competition this year so far because of Adepticon being canceled and other things being canceled. And certainly there's some more that I've got my sights I want to work on. I don't have any huge kind of ideas right now or big projects that I know what I want to do. I'm very much like, I paint for my armies, I paint for myself, and then sometimes I paint for competition. And I'm a firm believer that the big stuff, the competition stuff, it has to hit me when the muse strikes. I very much believe in the whispers of the muse. I'm not somebody who just says, well, time to do a thing for competition, so now I will just sit down and mechanically make this thing for competition. Beep, boop, beep. Like, it comes out if you're not passionate about a piece. So my short answer is I don't know. I mean, I know I'm excited for when the Sons of Bahamut, the Giants launch for AOS. I know those will be really fun. I'm excited to paint those. Yeah. For sure. But there's a couple busts that I know I want to work on that have been sitting around for a while. But, just continuing to work right now. What I'll say is that the situation with the current global pandemic has gotten me not in any way melancholy or melancholic, just more of freeing, honestly, because I don't know when the next competition is going to be, and I have a lot of stuff already. So so let's just mess around, right? Let's use this time to try to do some more deep learning, to play with stuff. I've been painting a lot more with oils recently, with oil paints, and really enjoying that. So it's just more about, just really continuing to push, playing a lot more with, like I said, different mediums like that, but also with different colors and light and those kinds of things, just trying to integrate them better into my pieces.
that sounds awesome, and I think that is an attainable goal that your hobby is already on, and I just wanted to thank you again for talking with me, but also just thank you for all the information. I hope people take the time to go out of their way to tell you thank you, because I have been so lost on pieces and been like, I am just going to see if Vince has done a video on it, and almost always there is, and it's almost always like it's just like, oh, it's just this, just do it this way. Take a break, and I really appreciate that, because like I said, it's so, this hobby feels so altruistic, and without people like you in it, I think it would be a very different place, and I really appreciate all the time and effort you put into it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I have no plans to stop anytime soon, and it's a lot of fun. And what I would say to everybody is keep painting. Paint bravely. Don't ever let yourself get held back by fear. Don't ever let yourself stop learning, exploring. There's so much to be fun. This is a journey of a full life, so it's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for talking with me. You do Wednesday Warhammer chats, Saturday hobby cheating videos, and once a month the miniature critique, correct?
Yep, that's right. So I do the PMP review. That's my Facebook community. You can join that if you just look for PMP. The links are in all the PMP review videos. You can join up. I also do, everything else I do is kind of off cycle. Like I do interviews as well with other artists. I do,
which are
product reviews.
Awesome interviews.
I do sort of product reviews, and I try to do at least 3 videos a week. So some weeks it's 2, some weeks it's 4. It depends, but there's always at least a hobby cheating on Saturday and Warhammer Weekly on Wednesdays. So that always happens.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. I'll join in that PMP group. I was always a little intimidated by it, and now, because like I had that arc of being like, I'm way better than what I am, even though I was down here. I'm back at this point where I know where I am at, and that's one of the most freeing places to be, because it means that I only got up to go, and so I'm looking for more painting communities to keep me moving and keep me motivated.
It's a great community full of positive people, so it really is wonderful.
Excellent. Well, Vince, thank you again. I really appreciate it, and I will catch up with you later. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Hobby Time in the Murder Basement. I so appreciate your support. If you want to see more hobby content, hop on over to twitch.tv/Heath Aldrich to see all of your fun hobby content streaming whenever I get a free chance. If you like listening to these episodes in more of a podcast form, I should be on all of your favorite podcasting apps. Make sure that you like and subscribe to me there. If you can, leave me a 5-star review. I'd really appreciate it. Have a nice rest of your day, and we'll be talking to you soon.